Over the past few years, this idea of self-awareness has unexpectedly become a personality trait that I value, and surprisingly something that I don't quite see enough of, and something that I think isn't talked about quite enough, at least from what I see online and on social media. So in this video, I want to go over what self-awareness is and why I think it's so important. I also want to cover 3 ways that you can start implementing this practice of self-awareness into your own life. So if that's something that interests you, let's get started. So let's start with what is self-awareness and why it's so important. So let me first cover what it is. Self-awareness is the habit of paying attention to the way you think, feel, and behave. So it involves looking for patterns in how we explain things to ourselves and make sense of the world around us. It involves understanding our emotions, figuring out why we feel the way we do, even when we're going through the negative emotions and it becomes painful or uncomfortable. And it also involves figuring out why you respond to certain things a certain way and discovering what your habits and tendencies are. And I think there's 4 main reasons as to why self-awareness is so important. Number 1, it allows you to figure out who you are and what you value so you can more easily interact with others. A lot of times we don't know what we want out of a relationship, not because of something the other person is doing, but because the values that we have for ourselves aren't clear, so we can't properly communicate with the other person, the main goal of that relationship. Number 2, it allows for more effective communication. So many of us run into conflicts or maybe end up in toxic relationships because number 1, we don't understand and accept ourselves as much as we want to admit, and so we might blame the other person when it might be mostly our fault. And number 2, we don't fully understand why we're acting the way we are, and so we might be missing or avoiding the underlying issue. And the 3rd reason as to why self-awareness is so important is because it improves our mood. To be honest, much of our mood depends on what we're thinking about at the time. If you improve the relationship between your thoughts and your behavior, meaning that you understand and accept why you think a certain way or act a certain way, the emotions that you have will automatically become easier to regulate. And finally, number 4, self-awareness allows for better decision making. A lot of the poor decisions that we make come from a lack of thinking, and when it's based upon our immediate emotional reaction. Becoming more self-aware can help you more easily distinguish between those short-term impulses and those long-term goals. So now that we've defined what self-awareness is and why it's so important, I want to go over 3 ways that you can start implementing this type of thinking into your life. Number 1 is to be open to negative feedback. For me personally, I don't remember when or why I realized that it was important for me to ask for honest feedback. And I think for many people, this definitely isn't natural or something that people are open to. I'm almost positive that it wasn't for me. I just don't quite remember the catalyst as to when or why I became open to and actively searched for honest feedback. But being open to feedback of any kind, taking it to heart, thinking about whether or not there's any truth to what they're saying, and thinking about ways to improve can be one of the most effective ways to improve ourselves. And you might be tempted to think, I don't need to ask for feedback. I already know what I need to improve on. But it's usually the blind spots that we have that are the real problem. Other people have a unique perspective when interacting with us on a consistent basis. And we probably do some annoying things or discouraging things to other people that we ourselves wouldn't have noticed otherwise. So being open to asking for feedback, acknowledging it, and figuring out ways to improve that aspect of your life can be a good first step. Number 2 is to identify emotional kryptonite. You ever see a term that may seem obvious as to what it means, but when someone asks you to actually explain it, you blank and have no idea what to say? No? Just me? Okay. Anyways, that was what I first thought when I first saw this term. But to explain what emotional kryptonite means, let me think. I'm sure that we can all agree that no one likes to feel sad or disappointed or anxious or angry or any of those other negative emotions. When we're in any of these emotional states, we tend to react mentally or sometimes even physically. You tend to have a lot of these negative thoughts going through your mind, and physically you might feel more tired than usual, or you might be more hungry than usual. Any state that isn't normal for you. But anyways, among all of these negative emotions, if you dig deeper, there's usually that one negative emotion that you'll go to extreme lengths to try to avoid. Maybe distracting yourself no matter what the cost. For example, if someone went through something tragic and is trying to avoid extreme sadness, to avoid feeling that way, they might go drown themselves in work. They might go on a shopping spree to try and forget about what they're going through. Or they might hang out with their friends 24/7 to try to distract themselves from feeling that way. And it's usually this way because of their experience with it in the past. Maybe it scarred them in a powerful way to where it might be easier for them to participate in an activity that they don't usually enjoy just to avoid that emotion. Something about what they experienced in the past hurt them so deeply that they will pretty much do anything just to not feel that way again. The problem with this is that even though it can be extremely hard, being so afraid of an emotion that we're willing to do pretty much anything to avoid it may lead to negative consequences in the future. We're also avoiding what that emotion may be trying to teach us. The reason why we have so many of these negative emotions and why it hurts so much is because our mind is trying to get our attention. It's trying to teach us something, and many times it's for a good reason. Being able to face your kryptonite head on can teach you so much about yourself and your values if you're just willing to process it and listen. And the last tip I have is to just be open-minded. You're probably thinking, this tip isn't helpful at all. Being open-minded is a lot easier to say than it is to do. And it's such a general term. Why can't you give me a more practical tip? But really, when it comes down to it, being more self-aware requires that you reflect on who you are as a person. What you like, what you don't like. You need to figure out why you act certain ways. You need to think about what you value and why you value it. And identify patterns of behavior that you have and think about why you fall into those patterns and whether or not you're doing something wrong. To help with this, you may want to go take a personality test to see why you are the way you are. But just giving yourself the opportunity to think about these things can open a lot of doors into realizing who you are as an individual. And in my humble opinion, I think having this trait largely depends on the environment you grew up in. And not to share too much, I think because of who I grew up around, where I grew up, largely influenced the way I think about myself and why I think this trait is so important. Really, all of what I just said may sound too psychological or magical, but really it's just a habit and a way of thinking. Internalizing and taking the time to process our behaviors and our values. I am by no means perfect, but this is something that I've realized about myself and something that I think can be very beneficial to a lot of people. So if this is something that you found interesting, or you think that your friends or family may benefit from knowing about this, feel free to share this with them. But this is something that I plan to make a lot more videos on, just because of how important I think it is. And there's still a lot more that I haven't covered in this introductory video per se. But like always, if you made it to the end, you clearly didn't find me too boring. So go ahead and click the subscribe button down below. That's been it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.